I think we're back. Yay! You know me, I couldn't stand to do a reading without some drama. I'm glad that we're back. So, I believe I was in the middle of this poem called GABA or gamma aminobutyric acid. For those of you who didn't catch the beginning of that, the GABA is an amino acid that is actually a neurotransmitter in the brain. Tends to be a little bit lower in people who have anxiety disorders. So this is that poem. Worry is another love. To worry is to love. Sweet talismans of take care, be well. Not enough to guard against metal sharpened teeth biting down on inner cheeks, salted salivary shame flowing down through lips. My mother's love is worried cuticles, scorched forearms, forcing a plastic lid cracked open to peel back foil of never sour enough moss, tanged with thick prepped herbs that radiate love, a worried radiation full of sweet morsels to feed syrup down your throat, while raw short nails scoring the plain of Mars, kindling flames, humming glassy-eyed, worry sheared razor thin, roasted fat dripping hot, burning flesh, wiping out well-being. My mother's love, a sun small enough to burn me, encompassing warmth, coppered hot and floral, mint alighting my tongue, irradiated comfort fleeting against bordered creases in our eyes. Mirror the way my love is wearing, care tossed and wrapped around my figure, refreshed to pink and blue plump little cakes, climbing to dream ourselves wicked, benzos bitter on our tongues, unease dissolving sharp and metallic, worry burned brightly away under a chemical blank, a challenge forgotten. Thanks for coming back. I appreciate that. I know anytime a stream of mine goes haywire, I'm always like, is it coming back? I'm not sure. So thank you for coming back. I really appreciate it. This next poem is called Tasbih, and it will be the last one that I will leave you with tonight. Tasbih. My father's tasbih had green beads of a chartreuse that I've never found in any other hue. Its green was lighter than the bottom of the Heineken bottle he would lift up to his mustached lips, but not as fluorescent as the peak of saffron-soaked rice mountains my mom would steam in the kitchen. Translucent beads, soft and frosted as sea glass, thicker than a grain of rice, but just as long, made a soft, gentle sound, rubbing against each other, smoothing the surface of the bead nest. Seeing it in my father's hands, you might call it a rosary, but he didn't pray to Allah or anyone else. Maybe he prayed to himself. Maybe the worn Freudian threads knotted between each bead encapsulated the knots he couldn't untie within himself. I never understood what these beads meant to my father, only they were important and provided a comfort that couldn't be found elsewhere. My father's tasbih consumed his worries as he rolled the dice of his backgammon silently on the Persian carpet. dice in one hand, tasbih in the other. As the beads came alive, as light filtered through, reflections dancing over his calloused thumbs that worked the copper wires inside of a lighting fixture during the day. When I was small, I coveted the tasbih he lavished his attention on. I watched him from the split in the door frame as I laid on my bed wondering, what was he thinking about as the square die and oblong beads caressed his skin? What does he say to himself in place of Allah Akbar as the repetitive motion of gleaming silky beads stroke the calluses of his hands? Last year, my aunt gifted me my own tasbih, round, large red orbs, a glossy, ripe red, like a fresh stiletto manicure, weighing heavy on its thin threading. This is a decorative one, my mom told me, and the message was clear. This wasn't one meant to run your hands through with the weight of your worries, but one meant to show your status in the society my parents left. I haven't seen my father with his tasbih in years. I wonder where it has gone, along with the color in his mustache and the light in his eyes. Was it another thing he lost along the way to making everyone else happy but himself? I have a soft spot for that poem because it was one of the first ones that I had ever written in a writing workshop, and it was in the Iranian Identity Writing Workshop led by Anita Amizrahi and Persis Karim. Persis Karim is the director for the Center for Iranian Diaspora Studies at San Francisco State, my alma mater. But the center didn't exist when I went to school there. And Anita is a professor at the California College of the Arts. They're both fantastic writers. And my book these particular facets of my experience were worthy of being witnessed and listened to. I started writing as a result of diving very deeply and heavily into Iranian American literature in 2016. And I read so many memoirs of people who had immigrated after the revolution, people who were stranded in the United States when the revolution happened, Iranian Americans who were first generation born in the US, but I never really found my specifics like flavor and slice of living in the Iranian diaspora reflected back at me. And that was something that I felt really strongly about actually having represented, because at the time Shahs of Sunset was airing, and this idea of what Iranian was very narrow, of this very affluent, like capitalist driven society that was very based on appearances and manners. And while that was like some aspects of that was resonant with my experience, it wasn't always, because my parents are working class and I didn't really see the narratives of working class Iranians reflected in the specific narratives and texts that I was reading. Well, I'm really thankful for reading all of that and what that literature has done for me, what it has done for so much of us finding our ways in the assimilation process. Frankly, I have been really fortunate in having the space to write myself into existence, so to speak, whereas I wouldn't have had that, I think, if I didn't pursue generative writing workshops. And that's why you will always hear me sing high praises of the community writing workshop. I don't have an MFA. I have a master's of arts in English literature. So I am a former academic, but I wasn't a degreed creative writer. And I had to kind of break myself of the academic style of writing when it came to writing creatively in my poetry. And so I think the community writing workshop is something that's a really important and fertile space, and something that I will always come back to, I think, as a writer throughout the rest of my career. We have some questions now. What am I working on right now, or what am I obsessed with writing about right now? I will be frank, I am a very slow writer, and I haven't, unfortunately, been writing as much this year as I would like to. I did 2 weeks of the 30 for 30 poetry challenge for National Poetry Month in this April, and I found a lot of the poems that I was writing were coming as very kind of lush love poems, which is, if you read my book, there's not too many love poems in there, which I think is a very interesting turn my work is taking. I am also kind of gearing up to write a YA fantasy trilogy. If you can tell, I really like the magical girl genre. I think Steven Universe is a really good example of a kind of like an homage, like a love letter to the magical girl genre, and that's kind of what I want my next YA trilogy to be. But it will have an Iranian American protagonist who discovers that she is queer, and she will come into magical powers while also trying to just survive high school. And one aspect of the magical girl genre that I always found a little bit unrealistic for me as a child with like strict parents was that how the parents were never really like when it comes to immigrant families. And go ahead and take Shannon's question of sibilance and hushed tones, of the sonic quality of my work and how I build that. I will be quite frank and say that I will get like sentences and like phrases of words stuck in my head kind of over and over again, and need to kind of get that out on paper. And it's not until I actually read it out loud that I hear that sonic quality of it. I think part of it has to come with how poetry is really intrinsically linked to rhythm and music. I think of hip hop specifically because of that is a very lyrically and sonically driven art form that is matched to music rather than the other way around. And it speaks, I think, to the oral tradition of us when we were telling stories around a campfire, or there was a traveling bard being able to tell stories through like the musical performance. And I think poetry is really closely linked to that, and I definitely see homages of that in my work. And then restricted. I really encountered poets within the Bay Area, San Francisco, and the East Bay, sometimes in the Peninsula and the South Bay, But we didn't have too much cross-pollination with that just because of the distance. But now with the ability of having like video conferencing and Zoom readings and literary festivals, like I've been really fortunate that I've been able to participate in like literary festivals that have taken like place 3,000 miles away, just outright. And then we also had the opportunity with the literary nonprofit that I work with, Radar Productions, to actually have other artists that weren't necessarily based in California in the area. And I think of Kai Coggins as well with the Wednesday night poetry and how that was a previously in-person reading series and it like blossomed into this beautiful, like almost like worldwide poetry community. And I've been very fortunate to like hear poets that I wouldn't have necessarily had access to before without this virtual formatting. So I'm really hoping that as more cities and more states come out of the lockdown process, that we keep those virtual events alongside our in-person events, because I think that it provides a really vital space for people who wouldn't necessarily have access to that, whether it's due to like physical access or just actual geographical access. And I am hoping that more organizations, especially literary nonprofits and literary organizations, will move forward having a hybrid format as long as everyone has the internet. All right, I think that is my time. I know we kind of went a little bit over because of our technical difficulty. If there is any other questions, you can always feel free to reach out to me on Twitter and Instagram at @lightningrod. If you would like a signed copy of Scattered Arils, you can also direct message me. The copies from my publisher, Milk and Cake Press, won't be signed, but I am happy to send you a book plate if you direct message me, or I can also send you a signed copy and you can work out the details. And this is kind of one of my favorite parts of this process is like packing up books for people and putting my own personal flair on it. I have a lot of washi tape that needs to go in envelopes. So if you like stationery, I'm your person for that. All right, and you can also find my work on my website, denarod.com. And what else? Oh, and I am the creative nonfiction editor for Homology Lit, and we're now accepting submissions. So if you're a queer writer, feel free to send us your work. And I'm also one of the readers for the Rumpus. And so we are also, I believe, accepting submissions currently. So hit us up. Anyway, thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I am really excited to get to connect. And thank you again to Poets in Pajamas for having this poet in their pajamas. Farewell.